I mean, yes, because again, I discovered the Beatles organically. I know that's a word that Christina loves. Is when I say organically, something happens organically.
Like an album popped out of in your room.
That's right.
I was using it.
He grew it in the,
I was using the
bathtub.
restroom, and
hey, looky there,
an album occurred.
Gross.
Was on the toilet, and an album happened.
But it wasn't a turd at all.
It happened organically. I put it on a turntable, and it played. But no. But in reality, I discovered it on my own. I discovered it, and then I started to play those albums. And
What do you mean you
Can I
discovered
back
it
up?
on your own?
Yeah, I was about to ask the same question. How do you,
I didn't have anybody.
Well, how
no, I
did you
mean,
get
where
a hold
did
of
it
the
come?
album?
How, that's
Well,
what-
how I discovered the Beatles in general, I heard, "Got to Get You Into My Life" on the radio. I heard "Got to Get You Into My Life" on the radio. What album is that on? I think it's on. Is that on the White Album? No.
I get them all confused.
I'd have to look up what exactly "Got to Get You Into My Life" was on, but I heard it, and I heard those horns. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And I actually thought it was just Paul McCartney, because I knew Paul McCartney at that age. This was the early
Wings
80s from Wings.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew Paul McCartney, Silly Little Love Songs and My Love, and With a Little Luck.
Let him in.
He was the star then. And actually it was
Band
because...
on the Run.
And the reason was because of Live and Let Die, because that James Bond movie came out in the mid 80s, and he did the soundtrack for it, or the theme song.
Right.
So I picked up Paul McCartney. I was like, oh, it's Paul McCartney. I haven't heard this song, and I was into it. I was way into it. And then they said it's the Beatles, and I was like, well, who's the Beatles? And I was only 10, maybe. I wasn't that old, so it's not a sin for a 10-year-old not to know what the Beatles were. So then I just started I looked up what album that was on, which was very hard back in 1984 to have to look up.
You probably just asked your mom.
Well, my mom didn't know what album that was on.
Really?
She did not. So I looked it up and just started kind of listening to it from there. But I definitely, it just changed my whole perspective. At that point I was way into hair band stuff,
Right.
and you really didn't know some of the older stuff that would influence you later, but that opened my eyes from that point on. And then I was just,
and a lot of times you
gone.
would shun it too. I mean, at least for me, it would be like, it's like, well, I like this stuff. I'm not gonna. That's old dinosaur rock or whatever. But same for me though. It was the Beatles. It was like, there's something there,
Well, it's like any kid. I saw two kids I told this story before. I saw two kids in a line at the store, and they were right in front of me in a line at the store. And they were talking about this new band that the one kid had just discovered. And he was like, oh man, this stuff is great. This album is awesome. It's called, what was the band's name? The Black Crowes. It's called Shake Your Moneymaker. And this was 3 years ago. And these kids, this was 3 years ago.
In line at Publix.
This just happened. Okay.
This just happened. And so these kids had just discovered this. And so to them, it was new. So to me, it wasn't, to me, it was brand new. I was just discovering it. It was blowing my mind. I was telling my buddies, hey, have you heard this Beatles shit? And they're like, oh, man. So then we all kind of got into that. Because at that point, we were into Night Ranger and all that kind of stuff. But that's how it happened for me. Christina was different. She had family who worked her in, right?
Yeah. Since I was a kid. Like I said, my stepdad and my mom, they liked the older stuff. And then my other mom.
You had a lot of family.
I did. But yeah, she loved the Beatles. And she played it constantly. Like all of it. Like Sgt. Pepper was that was huge in our house. Huge, like all the time. Because it was my sister's favorite.
It was just so sonically different. I mean, it was just so much different than even the album before it, again.
Yeah.
So
I was like, I was like just confused when people didn't know who the Beatles were. Like, really? Like, it just always was playing in our house.
They took a lot of production chances and, just experimented. And it was, I don't know, I was, even from an early age, when I heard weird sounds, even like we talked about at the beginning of the Van Halen with the car horn, same thing, it's like, what is that? How did that happen? And still to this day, I don't know how they did some of the things they did on Sgt. Pepper, some of the sounds they made, and that's,
And very slyly working
50
in
something years ago.
drug references and
Yeah.
you know, and the lyrics were really
Yeah, the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Yeah,
The
very-
LSD. Yeah.
Well,
And they tell that story that maybe that wasn't, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say, but
And I heard that stuff so young that never even occurred to me. I just thought these
Oh, me
lyrics
either.
were, sweet. Who comes up with this stuff as like
Right.
a great bedtime story? You know, it didn't sound like,
do you guys
I had
know
no clue.
Do you know the story about the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds where John Lennon says it came from?
no.
Well, everybody's always said it's a drug reference, but he says his son drew a picture that was on the fridge of Lucy in the sky, and then it had a diamond on it. It was a crayon drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, is what he says. That was his.
That he saw
Have
when he
you
was
ever-
tripping. No, I'm kidding. Right?
Probably. He didn't say he wasn't tripping, but
Right?
yeah. But he said his son drew it, and it was on the fridge, and that's where he came up with the idea. And it said Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds on it.
It's just as good as any. Just as
I
good
don't
as
know.
any
I have
rationale.
no idea if it's true because I wasn't there, but I either read that or heard that somewhere. But you know,